We ready? Okay, let's go ahead and call the Johnston City Council meeting number 22-17 to order. Cindy, roll call, please.
Councilmember Cope,
Here.
Evans,
Here.
Martin,
Here.
Ready, Burkhart.
Here.
I want to welcome everyone that is in the audience this evening. If you are here for an item that is on the agenda, we would ask for you to wait for that item to come up to address the council at that time. If you're here for an item that is not on the agenda, there will be an opportunity under public communications to address the council. The next item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I always like to invite the young people in the audience to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you do us the honors? And you can come up here to the flag if you want to. I see more than one young person.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And before you step away, I'm guessing you'll probably be introduced again this evening, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
I'm Cooper Driscoll.
Cooper? You want to wave to the audience?
I'm Logan Driscoll.
Logan?
I'm Mitch Driscoll.
And Mitch. You did a great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll talk
Nice
to you
job,
later.
Mitch. He's one of Davis's friends.
The next item on the agenda is the agenda approval. Do we have any changes to the agenda, Jim?
Yes, I'd like to ask for one change to the agenda. We're going to pull item 5K. That has to do with an agreement that was included in the agenda. We didn't receive the agreement till today, so the council didn't have an opportunity to review it prior to the meeting. And so we'd like to pull it and we'll have it on the next council meeting.
Okay. Any other changes, council? If not, do we have a motion to approve the agenda with the removal of 5K?
So move. Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Evans,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Ready,
Yes.
Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope.
Yes.
Motion passed. Moving on to public communications. We have one scheduled public communication this evening, and that is proclaiming September 2022 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And I know we have some guests in the audience this evening that are here to receive the proclamation. I guess I would ask you to come forward. I don't know if you want to say anything before I read the proclamation. Well, we have a it's not doing anything. We have a proclamation this evening that reads Childhood Cancer Awareness Month 2022. Whereas childhood cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in children. And whereas 1 in 285 children in the United States will be diagnosed by their 20th birthday. And whereas 47 children per day, or 17,155 children per year, are diagnosed with cancer in the United States. And whereas the average age of diagnosis is 6 years old, compared to 66 years for adults' cancer diagnosis. And whereas 2/3 of childhood cancer patients will have chronic health conditions as a result of their treatment toxicity, with 1/4 being classified as severe to life-threatening. And whereas in the last 20 years, only 4 new drugs have been approved by the FDA to specifically treat childhood cancer. And whereas the National Cancer Institute recognizes the unique research needs of childhood cancer and the associated need for increased funding to carry this out. Whereas hundreds of nonprofit organizations at the local and national level, including Children's Cancer Connection, Family Cancer Network, and Unravel Iowa, are helping children with cancer and their families cope through educational, emotional, and financial support. And whereas too many children are affected by this deadly disease, and more must be done to raise awareness and find a cure. Now, therefore, I, Paula Dierenfeld, Mayor of Johnston, do hereby proclaim September 2022 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month in Johnston, Iowa. I encourage community members to observe Childhood Cancer Awareness Month and support this cause that so deeply impacts families here and throughout our country. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and seal of the City of Johnston to be affixed this 6th day of September 2022. And I have signed it. I just want to say I read that slowly because I wanted everybody to absorb the information that was in this proclamation, because I read it for the first time yesterday, and I was surprised by some of the information in here. The number of children that are affected, daily and yearly, and the average age, and the lack of research to find a cure for childhood cancer. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody heard what this proclamation says, because it's so very important. And we do need to find a cure.
So I'm Jennifer Hines. I'm CEO of Children's Cancer Connection. We moved to Johnston, Iowa in December of 2021. So we've been here less than a year. We're very proud to call Johnston our home. We love it here. We've been so welcomed. But we do serve the entire state of Iowa. Last year, we served just shy of 750 families across the state. And we have one of our families here tonight. They are the Driscoll family, and they are Johnston residents. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Mike Driscoll.
I'm Christy Driscoll.
Hi, I'm Logan Driscoll.
And Go Driscoll.
I'm Mitch Driscoll.
Did the Driscoll family?
I guess so. No, we just appreciate all your support and raising awareness. Very supported by Children's Cancer Connection. So appreciate all.
I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 3, so just a little bit under the normal 6 age. 10.
7 years ago.
Yep.
You're a tough guy. You just hang in there, okay?
Okay.
Looks like you're doing a great job.
Yep.
I just want to say we are just so pleased to have the Children's Cancer Connection here in Johnston. It's a great addition to our community, and of course, we're very supportive of everything that you do. And the Driscoll family, of course, being Johnston residents. How long have you lived here? 18 years. Okay. Okay. Well, I hope you will be here easily another 80 years. So I'm pleased to have you in the community. Let's should we proclamation? We are still under public communications. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda? Is there anyone online, Cindy? Seeing none, we'll move on to public hearings, and we have 3 public hearings this evening. The first is to conduct a public hearing and consider approval of the first reading of ordinance number 1081, amending chapter 166.35 architectural standards of the Johnston zoning ordinance, PZ case 22-27. And we will open this public hearing at 7:14. Clayton?
Good evening. This ordinance change comes to you from request from the Life Serve Blood Center headquarters. They are proposing to construct a new headquarter facilities on Merle Hay Road. And as part of that, they would have a brick requirement along their facade facing Merle Hay Road. We have previously talked about architectural standards as part of our ongoing entire zoning code update. And as part of that overall update, we are proposing that we would eliminate that 50% brick requirement. So really the action tonight is expediting adoption of that singular portion of the new code and eliminating the 50% brick requirement facing Merle Hay Road, Northwest 86th Street, and Northwest 62nd Avenue. The remainder of the existing code would remain intact for the time being, with the intention to adopt the remainder of the new zoning code when we adopt the rest of the zoning code, hopefully at this winter. With that, happy to answer your questions, go into further detail as needed.
Council have any questions for Clayton?
I don't have any questions. I think it might be helpful just to maybe before, because I presume this is an ordinance change, so it requires 3 readings.
Yes, this is.
And I don't know, are we on an expedited timetable because of the?
No, this was intended to go through full 3 readings.
Okay. It might be helpful to maybe circulate prior to the next reading what the revised standards that they're considering to replace the brick requirement.
Yep, I can certainly attach that with the second reading.
Okay, that'd be great.
Any other questions or comments? Council?
Only additional item I would add that I forgot to say was Planning and Zoning Commission has reviewed this and does recommend approval.
Any other questions or comments? If not, this is a public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing then at 7:16. Do we have a motion to approve ordinance number 1081?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Martin,
Yes.
Ready,
Yes.
Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion passed. Item 4B is another public hearing to consider approval of resolution number 22-212, releasing and vacating a public overland flowage easement within Lot 103 and Lot 104 Northwest Beaver Business Park. We'll open this public hearing at 7:17.
4705 Northwest 59th LLC and 4725 Northwest 59th LLC have requested the elimination of an existing public overland flowage easement located within the aforementioned lots in Northwest Beaver Business Park. That's the development on the corner of Northwest 59th Avenue and Northwest Beaver Drive. The Sikh temple is located in that development for reference. The applicant is proposing development of lot 104, the easternmost lot. That is a site plan later on in the agenda tonight. They are proposing to establish some new easements with the site plan. So there is a condition to vacating this that they would have to grant the new private storm sewer easement that would drain lot 103 prior to us releasing the easement as final and recording it. Otherwise, pretty straightforward item. Adequate drainage will be able to be maintained with the improvements as proposed later on in the agenda. Staff is recommending approval.
Does the council have any questions for Clayton?
Clayton, I just want to make sure, I think I just heard you say this, but in lieu of the overland flowage, they are amenable to a stormwater runoff underground, is that right, easement?
Yes, and that is what they have depicted on their site plan, which is on the non-consent agenda. So I have made it a condition of vacating this, that they would have to grant that prior to us releasing the overland flowage.
Okay,
The intention there being that lot 103 has adequate means to drain their site, which that would accomplish.
how is that, how is staff convinced that that's occurred? Just so I understand that process. In
That
other
it's
words-
adequate?
Yes,
Because they have indicated how both sites would be developed. They're different LLCs, but it's a common developer of both lots.
okay. All right, so we're not going to expect to have a second developer of 103 who actually is going to object to this means of making sure that that water runoff gets taken care of.
As of today, it is the same developer in control of both LLCs. And I can't predict the future that if it were to sell, that there might not be objections, but there is means that the property can drain,
Okay,
which is what we will be guaranteeing with this.
Any other questions, council? If not, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council? If you could state your name and address for the record.
Nicole Neal, 4121 Northwest Urbandale Drive. So basically, it's going from overland flowage is above ground currently, and it's moving to the storm sewer. So it's just moving underground. So it's within that same kind of splitting the properties. It's just moving down into the storm sewer to route to the basin, if that kind of helps clarify.
is it expected that the lot 103 will then also share an easement for that underground, or will it be exclusively on lot 104?
So it's on both.
Okay,
So it splits kind of, how do I explain this? Yeah, I was gonna say, it's kind of hard. I always have it here too, if you need it.
right, that's where I'm looking at right now.
Whoops. Guess I didn't give it back.
You want to speak or do you want me to?
Go for it if you want.
The new, so currently the overland flowage easement is straddling the property line here. They're proposing the new easement, which would follow this line. It is slightly further to the east, but it does provide adequate access for the site to drain from lot 103 in several locations on the site. And what this site plan is depicting, and I'll go into further detail later on the agenda, but it is showing how the both lots would develop in conjunction with one another as currently envisioned.
So just to make sure, Clayton, that I am aware, you're on page 3 of that elevation of that site plan, right?
Yeah, I believe that's page 3.
Okay, and this is item 7E that you're referencing at the moment in the non-consent?
Yeah, on the non-consent.
So on page 3, just so I know symbol-wise, in that shaded gray area, there are, what I'm presuming are some sort of grates for drainage. Is that what they are? 3 of those? Or what is that how water is in essence going to get into that stormwater?
Yeah,
easement?
so if we start at the upstream side, scroll down a little bit. So the first intake would be here, and that pipe would actually be stubbed up so that it can have additional intakes when Lot 103 develops.
Okay,
So they'll be able to extend that storm sewer. Then you'd have an intake here, and then there's one more further up. Again, that one is set up so that it can extend storm sewer and have additional intakes onto Lot 103.
does this flow south? Is that anticipated? Would the storm, now underground storm sewer would flow south?
It will flow north into a new detention basin, which is your next agenda item, where they are proposing to revise the boundaries of the existing regional stormwater detention basin, which is currently more or less a straight line, kind of a very small T. They'll put it into more of an L shape. So it will still serve the same purposes of stormwater detention, just in a revised location. So Lot 103 and Lot 104, they'd be able to drain through this pipe into the required detention basin.
And that is still on their lot?
The basin is entirely on Lot 104, correct? Yeah. Which has Lot 103 and Lot 104 both have rights to detain water there, in addition to the lot immediately to the north.
Okay. The lot to the north would also flow into that bioretention cell.
Yeah, because that kind of shapes like an L, and then at Beaver Drive, it turns and goes north. That basin does.
Okay. Where does if there was overflow for that cell, where would it go?
It would overtop at the outlet and cross the sidewalk onto Beaver Drive. Which is the same route it currently has today.
It crosses under Beaver Drive, or it actually?
It would cross over into the street surface.
Okay.
That's how it's designed to overflow today. There is a basin constructed out there today already. They're just proposing to modify the basin to support development.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you finished? Okay. Is there any other public comment on this? If not, do we have a motion to approve resolution number 22-212?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
You want to close the public hearing?
Oh, I probably should do that. Let's close the public hearing at 7:26. We do have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Reddy,
Yes.
Burkhart,
Yes.
Pope,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Motion passed. Item 4C, conduct public hearing and consider approval of resolution number 22-214, releasing and vacating a public stormwater detention easement within Lot 104, Northwest Beaver Business Park. And we will open this public hearing at 7:27. Clayton.
As with the last item on your agenda, this is a request from 4705 Northwest 59th LLC to eliminate a portion of a public stormwater detention easement on Lot 104 in Northwest Beaver Business Park. They would be proposing to reconstruct the existing basin along their northern property boundary. Currently, it extends along their eastern property boundary. It would still provide the water quantity volumes required for this site, Lot 103 to the west, and then the lots to the north that are allowed to drain into the basin. They would be also increasing some of the volume in there to address water quality, which is a new requirement that has been adopted since that basin was originally constructed. So the sites will still have the ability to detain water in a manner that was originally approved, plus some added water quality components as well. Staff is recommending approval of this. Happy to go into further detail, answer any questions if you have any.
Council have any questions for Clayton?
I do, Mayor. Clayton, you brought up in your last discussion that this retention basin, if it overflowed, would actually overflow the sidewalk and the surface of Beaver Drive. Do we have any engineering estimates as to what the likelihood is of that happening? Obviously that north lot is quite sizable. Do we have some validation that will be able to appropriately catch or retain all of that flow from 103, 104, and then what 59, 30 is? I don't want this water flowing over Beaver ever, I guess is really where I'm going.
Yeah, and I'll maybe defer to the project engineer on the likelihood of an overflow. I don't recall those numbers off the top of my head. But this has also been reviewed by the city's consulting engineer, Foth, and they're determining that the sites can be in compliance with our current stormwater codes.
Okay.
So it is being reviewed by them. I believe there is a few minor changes that have yet to be implemented, just some minor calculations, nothing too concerning. One benefit we do have is we have a site plan for Lot 104 in front of you tonight. We do have an active development proposal on that lot to the north. That'll be coming before you maybe your next meeting, if not the first one in October. And their Lot 103 is under common ownership with the site tonight. So we kind of have a good idea of what all is going to be draining there and how it's all going to work together.
Okay. Very good. We will hear from Foth or have a response from Foth before final adoption.
Of the site plan?
Yes.
I believe.
Or not of the site plan, but of this ordinance to remove the stormwater.
Yeah, it's just a resolution. I did put in a condition similar to the last one.
This is a single reading.
Yeah, but because it's vacated easement.
Prior to release of the easement, they have to grade the easement and provide the new easement prior to his filing his release. And then if you refer back to the site plan approval, they would have to address any outstanding comments from Foth prior to that as well. So they kind of work in conjunction with one another, that the site plan has to adequately meet all current adopted design standards prior to us releasing this and making it final.
All right. And Councilmember Cope did clarify for me that this is a single read. Sorry, I was thinking this would be multiple reads.
Yeah, there's just a resolution.
Okay.
Would you like to have the engineer speak to the likelihood of overtop?
Yes, please.
Please.
Good, okay, just want to make sure. So basically any detention basin does have to have more or less like an emergency is what we would say, call it, overflow point. So with that, in any event where we design to certain city standards, then once it's beyond those standards, you have to be able to build the water up. And then no matter what, it has to overflow, not towards our building, not towards someone else's building. So in this option, it is towards Beaver, and that is where it currently overtops as well. The likelihood is you're looking at, gosh, 100-year storm event is what that would have to be, and then some. So, because what we do is we design for Johnston's requirements. Basically, you have to design for, what is it? I think you're changing it 5 to 5 is what you're going to modify it to, but right now you have to go from all the way back to pre-existing conditions. So we have to treat this site as if it is grassland and even then some. So we are holding that water back by quite a bit. So what you have to do is you're going to overtop over to Beaver instead of overtopping, say, to a north, which that is, in today, is still the detention basin. So that the northern detention basin would even overtop to Beaver today instead of overtopping back to occupied buildings.
Certainly, and my concern is obviously having it overtop to a public roadway at all, as opposed to conducting some sort of rerouting of that flowage in that case. What I hear you saying, though, is this is designed to handle up to a once in 100-year water occurrence? Okay.
We have to provide 1-year storm events, 5-year, 100-year, all of that is provided within that stormwater management plan that we.
Very good. All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Any other questions, council? This is a public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council? If not, we will close the public hearing at 7:34. Do we have a motion to approve resolution number 22-214?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin,
yes,
Ready.
yes,
Motion passed. Moving on to the consent agenda. We have removed item 5K from the agenda. With that removal, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Cope,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin,
yes,
Ready,
yes,
Burkhart.
Yes.
Motion passed. Moving on to the non-consent agenda. Item 7A, consider approval of the first reading of ordinance number 1082, amending ordinance number 655, and providing that general property taxes shall no longer be divided on all property location within the Windsor Office Parkway Urban Renewal Area in the city of Johnston, county of Polk, state of Iowa, removing original area from division of taxes only, effective July 1, 2023. Adam.
Pull up that map that's attached for me, please. In 2002, the city entered into a development agreement with the Windsor Office Park Development Group for the development of this property. As part of that agreement, the city agreed to rebate 50% of the commercial property tax increment generated by the commercial development. We're now reaching the 20-year mandatory sunset on that TIF ordinance area. And as of June of this year, we made our final payment to the Windsor Office Park Development Group. So that $1.7 million and change obligation has been completed. At the end of this fiscal year, that TIF ordinance would terminate. There are a few undeveloped properties left in the Windsor Office Park. You'll see a plan probably early next year, late next year rather, to incorporate those undeveloped parcels into the Beaver Creek urban renewal area, which is the one that stretches along 86th Street, to provide us the opportunity to work with whoever would come forward to develop on those undeveloped parcels at that point. Did include a few statistics in there. Since 2002, Windsor Office Parks had more than $15 million in taxable growth. It's generated then, what would be, plus additional 6 million in residential growth. So it's developed about $3.5 million in TIF increment over that 20 years. So it's been a little slower, I think, than the developer originally anticipated, but there's a lot of nice commercial buildings out there. And we've got a couple additional expansion projects that are currently on the table out there as well. So I think it's been a successful urban renewal area for the city the last 20 years. Any questions?
Questions for Adam? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on this item? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance number 1082?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Evans,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Ready,
yes,
Burkhart,
Yes.
Coe.
Yes.
Motion passed. Item 7B, consider resolution number 22-225, establishing private properties to be designated for the 2022-2023 Urban Bow Hunt Program. Who's going to address the council on this? Looks like David.
This basically is just a resolution. You've already, last month, you've approved the public properties for the urban deer hunt. This year, we actually reduced the number of private properties due to just some individual private property owners not willing to have their property hunted anymore. So we're down to 3 private properties on this resolution. That would be the Atari property, which is a property that's traditionally been hunted in the past for the last 11 years. That property will receive a new hunter this year as the former hunter has moved out of town. But that property owner is excited to have a new hunter hunting on their property. Secondly, we've got the Derflinger property, which is also property that's been hunted in previous years. That one's been hunted for 9 years consecutively. And lastly, we have the Lee property, which was hunted for the first time last year successfully. So those are the 3 properties. If you have any questions specifically related to that, I can help you out.
Any questions for David?
I have one question. I just want to clarify. There were 3 maps that were provided as attachments to this agenda item. The Atari map gives red dashed or dotted circles. I'm assuming those are to indicate the distance away from residential properties. The other 2 maps have their dashed circles in green. Is there any difference between those? I mean, obviously, I know there's a color difference, and that's what I'm bringing to your attention. But are they to symbolize or recognize the same thing?
No, actually, that's just an error on my part. It's just I used a different color. They denote the same 200-foot setback from residences.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to clarify. You said it more succinctly than I.
Any other questions, council? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on this item? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve resolution number 22-225?
So moved.
second,
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Can you vote, please?
Councilmember Martin,
Yes.
Ready,
yes,
Burkhart,
Yes.
Coe.
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Motion passed. Item 7C, consider resolution number 22-216, approving the site plan for LifeServe Blood Center headquarters located at 5625 Northwest Johnston Drive. PZ case 22-23. Clayton.
Good evening. We have a site plan in front of us for development of a 56,569 square foot headquarter facilities at the northeast corner of Merle Hay Road and Northwest Johnston Drive. The facility will house office facilities for employees of LifeServe Blood Center, a blood donation center, a blood processing laboratory, and a fleet vehicle garage. Property is shown on our comprehensive plan as a commercial land use designation, and it is further identified as part of our Merle Hay Road Gateway sub-area plan. And in that plan, we had specifically hoped to see a facility with at least 15,000 square feet of commercial usage, and we're far exceeding that at 56,000 and change. So the property is, or the site is in compliance with our comprehensive plan as well as the sub-area plan for the Merle Hay Road Gateway. Property is currently zoned C3 Highway Service Commercial, and as proposed, all bulk regulations setbacks are met with the proposed site. As I believe everyone here is aware, the site is the home of the former Herd Gardens Nursery. And as such, there are a number of trees of significant value for unique characteristics or size or both on the site. The applicant has gone to extreme lengths to save as many trees as they can, especially those with unique characteristics. They are proposing preservation of what would amount to 414 caliper inches of trees, which would be the equivalent of 207 new trees if they were planted at our minimum planting requirements. We are proposing to provide credit towards our minimum required open space plantings. Towards that, however, they are still far exceeding their replanting efforts on the site as well, as I'll get to in a moment. But as Cindy had pulled up the tree removal plan, the ones that are in green are to be preserved. The ones with the red X are proposed removal. They will have tree protection fencing around those to be preserved, and work within those areas will be greatly limited to protect the root health and overall survivability of those trees so that they're able to survive and provide benefits for many years to come. Now jumping to our open space landscaping, they are meeting the minimum required open space of 20% with about 36% of their site. And they are far exceeding their planting requirements with 89 new trees to be planted on this site, plus their preservation, which would be the equivalent of almost 300 trees if you add up caliper inches. And they would only be required to have 9 new and 70 inches preserved for their minimum. So they're, again, far exceeding their minimum requirements. And they are exceeding their minimum shrubs as well by about a factor of 3. There are a number of buffers required on the site. There is a buffer on the north of the property. It would be 1/2 of a 50-foot buffer, so 25 feet in width with half the buffer materials. That's joining property currently zoned R1A, modified single-family residential. The applicant is requesting an alternative buffer consisting of recognition of the 200-foot power line easement to the north, which would restrict the ability for any residential structures to be located any closer than 200 feet from the site. And additionally, there is a slight uphill gradient from their site to those residential sites that would mitigate headlight glare onto residential properties. And on the east part of the property, they're adjoining will be future Johnston Crossing Apartments Phase 2. There, they're required to do half a 50-foot buffer, so 25 feet in width, half the buffer materials. They are requesting an alternative buffer here as well along the north half of that property line, where they would reduce the width of the buffer to 10 feet to support the installation of parking stalls. They would still retain the requisite amount of plantings, and to minimize headlight glare towards the apartment complex, they are proposing the use of evergreen plantings to provide year-round foliage to minimize headlight glare towards apartment units. The apartments are required to install the other half of their plantings as well and would do so upon their construction. So the requisite number of plantings will still be retained. It's just they'll be a little closer in to that site. Access to the site has been coordinated with the city as part of our ongoing public improvement project. They would have a access off of Northwest Merle Hay Road in the northwest, and then 2 access points off of Northwest Johnston Drive. The Merle Hay Road and western Northwest Johnston Drive would be right in, right out access. The far eastern Northwest Johnston Drive would be their full access point. And with all these together, it would support their ability to move vehicles throughout the site properly. As the applicant has explained to staff, the intention is that the Northwest Johnston Drive entrances would be the primary staff and visitor entrance locations. That Merle Hay Road entrance is primarily for fleet vehicles and staff as well, but primarily fleet vehicles to access their fleet vehicle garage, which is the northwest portion of their building. And then those are actually pull-through garages so that they can then exit front front out onto Northwest Johnston Drive and have access to the signal. And the site will have access to pedestrian infrastructure as well. They are connecting both at the intersection of Merle Hay Road and Johnston Drive, as well as a connection a little further east on Northwest Johnston Drive. So multiple means for staff and visitors to walk or bike to this site or elsewhere within the Merle Hay Road Gateway or Johnston at large. Property will have access to all public utilities, sanitary sewer, water, storm sewer. For parking for this site, they would be parking for office uses, warehouse uses for their fleet garage, and then the blood processing laboratory, we don't actually have a category in our code specifying what our parking requirement is there, so it's left to the determination of the zoning administrator. So what we did is we actually looked back at what is now Corteva's research facilities, and we had established a laboratory parking standard at that time, which is identical to what we're using here. So that was how we arrived at the 1 space per 500 square feet for the first 10,000 and 1 space per 750 thereafter. It was following suit with our previous approval of Corteva for laboratory space. They are requesting a deferral of 16 parking spaces to be constructed in the future as determined necessary by the city council. They feel that they can satisfy their parking demands for staff and visitors with 144 spaces, but they have identified where they can install those additional spaces if needed in the future. Property will have adequate access to fire protection. Fire department did note that they wanted some additional information on fire hydrant coverage on the northwest quadrant of the building. And so the applicant is working through that with the fire department. I believe it may have just been that they didn't have one of the hydrants identified there. So I think it was a pretty easy fix for them. Drainage for the site would be in 2 dry bottom detention basins on the eastern edge of the site that would be straddling their north-south private drive there. And that would ultimately outlet into the public storm sewer along Northwest Johnston Drive, flowing ultimately down towards Ray Schleiss Park and the drainage way that flows south to the new bridge. Property is not located in any floodway or floodplain. And architecture, Cindy, if you want to maybe open up the architecture as well. We previously on tonight's agenda passed the first reading of the ordinance to eliminate the brick requirement for the site. So action tonight will actually not approve the architecture. You'll have that on your agenda at the third reading of that ordinance amendment, because without that being finalized, they can't be in compliance with it. But they are proposing the use of multiple primary building materials that are permanent, that would meet our 75% permanent material on all facades. The only exception there is the 50% brick requirement along Merle Hay Road is currently not met. It is anticipated that the site will be in complete compliance with our current or with our architectural standards following third and final approval of the ordinance amendment 1081. I did provide notice to adjoining property owners. To date, no public comments have been received. This has been reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission, and they have recommended approval. With that, happy to go into further details, answer questions, and we do have representatives of the applicant if there's questions there as well.
Any questions for Clayton?
Mayor, I do have some questions.
Okay.
So first, I just want to say that I am very, very impressed with the landscape plan. And I also am very impressed with when we attended the groundbreaking ceremony, the discussion about the gardens for the donors and the respect they had for this very special piece of property, the former Hurd Gardens. And how they are working real hard to save some of the valuable trees. Even so, Clayton, I guess I'm going to state that I'm a little disappointed on the landscaping along the north edge of the property. This is the location where we are doing only half a buffer and have ended up with kind of like no landscape, no shrubs for a portion of it. And I think it's a missed opportunity. I understand the comment that Clayton, that you made about headlights and how big a distance there is to the residential further north. But still, I feel like that we should still have some sort of boundary delineation. I think some groupings of native shrubs to support our songbirds would be a lovely addition. So I'm going to ask that perhaps the blood serve people would maybe consider that along the north side. I'm not talking about a buffer you can't see through, but maybe something for our songbirds would be nice. And it would also serve to buffer all the view of all those cars parked along that north edge. I think that that's going to be my only comment here, besides again saying it's really a beautiful landscape plan. There are a tremendous variety of native plants that'll serve a lot of different habitats and bring diversity to this property. So that's my only request. Thank you.
And I would just respond that as currently requested, they have not identified any plantings for the required buffer along that northern section. Since they are requesting an alternative, the council does have the authority to still require plantings, and it could be limited to just shrubs if desired. I'd maybe defer over to the applicant on their willingness to accept that, but if the council so chose, you can require that.
Does the applicant want to respond to that?
Members, Devin Moody, 525 17th Street, Des Moines, Iowa. I'll tell you a little bit about our thought process on that north side. So beyond the property line is the mid-M electrical transmission easement, which is the large buffer with the electrical lines, and it's primarily just turf right now. Instead of providing shrubs and kind of a wall of planting along that property line to create a very sharp divide between our property and that easement, we've tried to bring in some of that turf, that what we're having wildflowers and natural lower grass elements to kind of blend those two properties together to create kind of a singularity, kind of, a ribbon, if you will, kind of pulling into the property line instead of, like I said, creating a sharp divide of planting along that property line. But we are very open to, of course, providing some of the shrubbery if it is required. And we can move some of the ones that we have, as you've seen the planting plan, it is quite heavily planted. We could massage that a little if we need to provide a little more on that northern property.
Thank you for your explanation. And I will just say that I totally understand what you're saying about blending the coarse native type grasses that are under those power lines to your site. But I do feel like there's some opportunity here to provide a little layering in a few shrubs that vary in height from 4 to 6 foot, and provide again for the songbirds, for other wildlife habitat. It does not have to be a wall.
In addition to providing some habitat for the bees, Councilman Martin would also like to see the birds taken care of.
Yes.
But not the feral cats.
There we go. That's where we draw the line.
Happy to answer any other questions.
So Councilman Martin, you're comfortable with them taking that into consideration?
I am comfortable. They have an excellent design team. I'm comfortable that they will take my suggestions and help us out a little bit on the north side without making it a requirement.
Very good. Thank you.
Mayor, I have another question for Clayton, just for clarification. Clayton, you had indicated that the applicant was seeking a kind of waiver for 16, or at least a deferral, I should say, for 16 current parking spaces. Those 14?
16.
It says in the staff report 14, so.
Whatever number I had in the staff
I'm sorry.
report.
Okay, no,
He said 16. I said
No, and that's why that is part of my question.
Okay,
I wanted to
okay.
make sure that we got that clarified. And the follow-up on that is the drawings then do not currently depict those 14 spaces anywhere, correct?
They do, not on this sheet. They have it split in two sections. The first is in the northwest quadrant. If you can go to sheet 8, yeah, you see the dashed line. I'm gonna the screen here. They've dashed out future parking there.
Ah,
Then I believe it might be the next page, Cindy. Down.
Fine.
Might not be listed on this specific sheet, but they'd have 10 more parallel along the north edge of that east-west drive.
okay.
It is on one of the sheets. I don't recall specifically which one.
All right, thank you.
Then those would get installed at the discretion of the city council if found needed in the future. They can always voluntarily install them as well.
Other questions or comments, council?
I mean, just from a comment standpoint, appreciate, I think we're very excited about this, the building, but also the high quality to it. And that's reflected in the site plan and the layout. It's going to bring a very unique building to the city. So very excited about that, and really appreciate LifeServe and their willingness to not only come to our community, but build a really first-class building in our community. We're excited about that. So appreciate that very much.
I think there's a great site example of what we hope to be getting out of our new zoning code from architecture, from site design. This is a prime example of a good design.
Any other questions or comments, council? If not, do we have a motion to approve resolution number 22-216?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second, further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes,
Ready.
Yes.
Motion passed. Moving on to item 7D, consider approval of the second reading of ordinance number 1080, amending chapter 169.09 to amend the design guidelines for the Merle Hay Road Town Square Overlay Zoning District, PZ case 22-19. Clayton.
No updates and no public comments received since first reading.
Don't have any questions for Clayton?
I don't really have a question, but so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this properly. So basically, we're allowing for the trestle to have a rooftop sign. We're not allowing anybody else to, at least based on this wording.
That would be correct.
And I'm okay with that, but obviously if a business does come along and say that they want a rooftop sign, I think the fact that we've kind of allowed it on our city property, part of it, I'm gonna be, if that comes along, I always like us to treat kind of like as like. And so just once we kind of open the door to it being that way on the trestle, I do think we need to then consider opening that door if we get a similar request from a business that's located in that provision. I just think we need to be aware of that, so.
And certainly something we could further discuss with our upcoming discussion on signage code under staff comments as well.
Well, and again, I'm not, because we may not even have that situation come up. I think it's just whenever we sort of create a situation that allows it for kind of a public-private, then I think we need to allow it if we get a similar request from the privates as well. But I'm fine with the wording the way it is.
Any other comments or questions? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the council on this item? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve second reading of ordinance number 1080?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second, further discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Cope,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Ready,
Yes.
Burkhart.
Yes.
Motion passed. Item 7E, consider resolution number 22-215, approving the site plan for 4705 Northwest 59th Avenue, PC case 22-29. Clayton?
We've talked about this site a little bit under the public hearings, but this is the actual site plan. This is for construction of a 9,850 square foot multi-tenant light industrial building located on the corner of Northwest 59th Avenue and Northwest Beaver Drive. Property is shown on our future land use map and our comp plan as industrial. So the proposed use is consistent with our comprehensive plan. Property is currently zoned M1 light industrial, and as proposed, the site is in compliance with all bulk regulations, including setbacks. The applicant is proposing removal of two 24-inch black walnut trees on the site, kind of in that southeasternly portion of the site. The city arborist has looked at those trees and has commented that one of the two is in pretty not good condition. Another one, unfortunately, the further west of the two into the developable area is of decent condition. The applicant has explored several alternatives to try to preserve that tree. However, they're just not able to find a site solution that works to allow them to keep it without significant disruption to their design and their financial pro forma. So they are proposing removal of both the existing trees on the site. They are meeting their open space landscaping requirement. Nearly double the amount of open space as required is being provided. And they are meeting the minimum planting requirements, 7 new trees, and exceeding their shrub requirement by a factor of about 2.5, so 24 shrubs. There are no buffers required on this site. Traffic access would be via a shared private drive straddling the property line between 4705 and 4720, I believe is what it was. Can't recall what the site to the west was, but that'd be a shared drive, and they'd have a private access easement established with the site plan as well. Pedestrian access would be from the front of the building out to the sidewalk along Northwest Beaver Drive, which would provide adequate means for pedestrians to have a separated path from vehicular traffic. Since this is a speculative building, the applicant has had to make some assumptions on usage of the building when it comes to parking requirements. So they have assumed that a portion of the building would be used for office, but primarily the building would be used for warehouse portions. And they are required to have 15 spaces based on their assumptions, and they're providing 16 spaces. So it should allow for some flexibility of usage in the site while recognizing a primarily warehouse usage of the building. Property will have access to all public utilities, sanitary sewer, water, storm sewer, and the building will have adequate protection, fire protection as well. Drainage for the site, as we had briefly discussed earlier in the meeting, is via a shared regional detention basin. They are proposing to grade that basin so that it straddles along the north property line rather than along the east property line. They will have to get that graded and grant us the new easement before we vacate the existing easement as final. Property is not located within any floodway or floodplain. Architecture for the site, the M1 district requires that any facade within 300 feet of the public street be composed of brick, architectural concrete panels, textured concrete block, architectural steel or stone panels. That requirement would apply to their east and south facades. They are meeting those requirements. The east elevation would be 25% stone and the south elevation would be 28% stone. Metal wall panel and glass would compose the remainder of the building materials. With that, I am happy to take any questions, answer any, go into further details needed. Representatives of the applicant are available if you have questions there. Planning and Zoning Commission has reviewed this and is recommending approval.
Else have any questions for Clayton?
Mayor, I do.
Okay.
Clayton, on the plan, in what would be the southeast corner of the site, the road that, the driveway that comes around to the front of the building looks like it's flat, the curve has been flattened off because they were getting too close to the 5-foot setback. Do you know where I'm talking?
Looking here. Okay, I got it pulled up, yeah.
So there's that transformer and then the curve is flattened out. And do they have, I guess the turning radius is what is somewhat concerning to me, that they have a turning radius and then they flatten it out to get around that building. I guess we would not have to make any comments on that turning radius. What I'm getting to is in this location here, and also where a little bit further to the north, where they have parking going both east and west. Again, it feels like this parking is right up against our sidewalk along Northwest Beaver. And then all the landscaping is on the north side of the site. My thing about this plan is I consider Northwest Beaver a very important street in that a lot of people travel it. They also travel through on Northwest Beaver. It might not be people that live on Northwest Beaver, although I travel on Northwest Beaver quite a bit. And I want to make sure that it has enough landscape along there that it doesn't look entirely industrial. And I'm taking a long time to say, I prefer that some of this landscaping that ended up on the north got between Northwest Beaver and the building. And then I'm just concerned that that this building is being shoehorned in here and it's hitting every minimum. I guess those are my comments. Do you have anything? I mean, you've reviewed this and instead of like making an approach that what could we do to make this site great? It seems like they are barely making this building and the parking lot fit on this site.
They are meeting their requirements per the zoning code. So I'm not sure that we can really mandate they go above and beyond. I'm not aware of anything that they're not complying with.
So like even the turnaround there where they have parking that goes both east and west at the, what would be now the northeast end of the parking lot. They have those back outs so that you can get out and turn around. I mean, I've never seen, I mean, they're minimum depths. If anybody parked a extended cab truck along there, they'd have to go back and forth about 6 times to get out. I just am concerned, and maybe in our next time that what we're doing right now with our zoning and our ordinances, stuff like this can be addressed, but I feel like there's very little leeway here. If there's a lot of snow and we're trying to clear our public sidewalks and they're clearing their parking lot, there's 5 feet from where they're pushing snow onto our sidewalk. These kind of things concern me. And I guess I'm on a soapbox right now, and I know that you are looking at these plans in terms of what our current ordinances is, and perhaps we can't do anything about it, but I do think in the future, stuff like this, I'd rather see a better plan, landscape-wise and layout-wise. Thanks.
I see John just walked up behind me.
There you go. I did want to mention one thing. With our Trails Committee, we are currently going through a list of potential priorities for the future. And I did just want to mention to the council that one of their priorities potentially in the future would be to make sure that there's a trail that would run the length of Beaver Drive. Obviously, this parking lot being this close to the sidewalk would eliminate that potential for the future. So just wanted to throw that out as one of those items that is being discussed right now.
John, just since you brought that up, so I'm just looking at kind of a Google map, and there's currently some sort of industrial facility that has been constructed on the opposite side of 59th Avenue. It looks like it has a parking area right next to the sidewalk as well. So is that a same concern there as well?
It probably is. We haven't, to be honest, we haven't taken a full look at this. As I said, we're just going through this process right now as far as what the future priorities are. We have, I think, 17 items identified within this committee. And this is one of those potentials. We would need to do a full inventory of what the potentials would be up along Beaver Drive.
I mean, just in looking at it from again, in the aerial, not, this is a Google map thing, but it does look like there's a fair amount of, from the current existing sidewalk to the back east, I don't know, gives you some room for a trail there.
Yeah.
And so the sidewalk is going to stay where it is, right? I mean, under this proposed plan.
Correct. The trail would just replace the sidewalk.
Right. It would take a 5 feet. Presumably, that's a pretty new sidewalk, I think. So it's probably a 5 foot wide sidewalk.
Presumably that when we would take the inside section of the sidewalk and build 5 feet to the west and not build closer to Beaver Drive, keeping maintaining the complete right of way for snow storage.
Okay. But you're going to have that same issue then if you do that on that property that we've already kind of done that for. So I have a hard time sort of saying, well, we have allowed that on the south side, but now not allowing it on the north side because it's kind of hard to manage that. So
I just wanted to bring it up as we look at these plans. So.
There are a fair number of similarities between the site in front of you tonight and then that building immediately to the south, as Councilmember Cope pointed out. They're at a 5 foot parking setback, and same as here. So a lot of similarities, different developers, but.
But they probably looked to the other site to see what happened there as they were developing their plan.
Very well may have. We do have representatives of the applicant if they wish to chime in on this as well, or if you have questions of them. Otherwise, if there's other questions of me.
Any other questions, Council? If not, well, is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the council on this item?
Nicole Neal, 4121 Northwest Urbandale Drive. So we are, yes, meeting city requirements for our setbacks. And our turning radius is currently on what would be the small corner closest to the building is a 25-foot radius. So it is adequate. We've run turning movements on this site to get vehicles in and out.
Any opportunity to shift around landscaping?
Yep, and I know we originally came in kind of, I guess, more meeting some more requirements when it came to landscaping, especially along that frontage. I think there's a concern with the amount of utilities that are there. We're not opposed to it in the future, especially when and if that second building is to develop and kind of function as one. We know that those updated city requirements would be in place when that second building would. So we know we would be enhancing landscaping then, and then really look at that time, getting some more plantings even along 59th and hopefully updating some of that frontage along Beaver.
Any other questions for the applicant? If not, my screen just went black. Do we have a motion to approve resolution number 22-215?
So moved.
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
I just would like to make a comment. Mayor, I will be voting in favor of this, but I will be anticipating that second building, and I hope that, as the engineer stated, that they will consider putting more landscape in there, going above and beyond what our requirements are, because this is an important corridor for our city. Thank you.
Any other discussion? If not, Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Martin,
Yes.
Ready,
Yes.
Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope,
Yes.
Evans.
Yes.
Motion passed. Item 7F, consider approval of claims in the amount of $1,867,544.90. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Cindy, vote please.
Councilmember Ready,
Yes.
Burkhart,
Yes.
Cope,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Martin.
Yes.
Motion passed. We have completed the items on the agenda other than the city administrator and city council comments. So why don't we go back to the item that we held over from the work session, which is to discuss zoning and subdivision regulation code update. Clayton.
We have two chapters of the upcoming zoning code for you to review tonight. Those are home occupations and signage. Home occupations is the more time sensitive of the two. We have an existing moratorium on enforcement of our current home occupation regulations. That's set to expire in early November. So we'd be looking to get that public hearing set and get that adoption process started within the month of October so that we can get that addressed in time to meet those moratorium deadlines there. I'm going to start with that section of code that has been reviewed by a subcommittee of the council, council members Cope, Councilmember Parkhart, and Mayor Dierenfeld. And we have had a preliminary discussion with the Planning and Zoning Commission at their last meeting. They have not reviewed it in terms of taking official vote on it yet, but they have reviewed it. And now we're here tonight to discuss it with the council. So Cindy, if we can maybe open up the home occupations. Just going to kind of take you through this. The definitions up front, those are provided for reference purposes on this draft here. Those would actually get placed into the definitions section of the zoning code. They would not be located in this subsection, but we wanted to make sure that they were here for your reference today. A few areas of note and definitions is, first one is adding the definition to remote work. Over the past few years especially, we have learned the need to allow for remote work for employees that essentially they just have a home office doing computer work. They're not having customers come to them. They're not stockpiling things. Those would be exempt from the home occupation standards. They will make sure it's clear that they're allowed to do it, but they're not required to comply with the further restrictions. And then in compliance with some recent updates to state legislation, we've updated some definitions regarding childcare. The one I would note that differs from state code slightly is child development home. We have capped it at 7 children. State code would have it, I believe it's 7 or greater. I don't think they have a cap on it. So we have still instilled a cap on the number of children on a child development home. And that's keeping in line with existing code we have today. Moving down, the first section of the code relates to activities that are explicitly prohibited from code. Our current home occupation section relates to things that are allowed, and they're very broad. So we're taking a different way to work with this. this time around. And instead saying, these are uses we really just don't want to have in our residential neighborhoods. They're just going to be in conflict for a variety of reasons. So we got those there. The one thing I do want to point out that the Planning and Zoning Commission had discussed, a draft they had item C as contractor shop. They asked for a further definition of that to make sure that the home woodworking hobbyist that maybe makes a chair or a couple small items, they're not prohibited from being able to conduct that very limited business. So we did add in the handicraft and or artisanal services, which routinely produce objectionable light, glare, noise, or vibration. That does allow for enforcement of if it's getting out of hand and just constantly just running machinery and making noise. That's the intent of that language. Another one I would point out is medical dental office. And what we wanted to make sure is we weren't prohibiting the counselors, the just minor medical type practices. So it's just, we would not allow those types of uses if they're producing biohazardous waste. The intent there is, especially like on trash day, we don't want to make sure that there's biohazardous waste just hanging out on our
Arms,
curb.
legs, teeth.
So that's those sections there, and feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions. Section 2 there is addressing items that are not covered under home occupations. That includes childcare homes and child development homes and remote work. Those are addressed in the code, but they would just be addressed elsewhere in the code on their requirements. So we're just saying they're not home occupations. Item 3 there is the regulations that home occupations will need to comply with. And what we're trying to say here is that the use has to happen in the principal dwelling or a permitted accessory structure. There would be limited to no more than 25% of the floor area of the dwelling unit or 500 square feet. I do want to highlight the 500 square feet. That is a increase from our current code. We're currently capped at no more than 400 square feet. So this would be a slight increase there. I don't really see any concerns with that. Item C was intended to address what is currently just kind of a broad, don't change the neighborhood character. And it really was very gray when it came to enforcement. So those subpoints are intended to provide some guidance and criteria to judge whether or not the neighborhood character has been changed. Exterior evidence of the home occupation, outdoor storage, excessive noise, vibration, glare, odor, etc., storage of flammable, explosive, or toxic materials. Those are things that just would make the use inconsistent with a residential neighborhood. Then jumping down more towards parking, we took a look at what are we really trying to regulate here? And one of the main things is the coming and goings of traffic and the parking that can be burdensome on neighborhoods. Current code has some references to max number of clients, but not necessarily vehicles. And the thought process here is if you have one client in the facility or 10, but there's only 1 or 2 cars, you may never know that there's that difference in clientele within the building. What's evident from the exterior is the number of vehicles parked on the site. So the standards are that all sites would be allowed to have 5 vehicles parked outside at any time when conducting a home occupation. And when we say all vehicles, that's personal vehicles, that's customer vehicles, the one vehicle used in commerce of the home occupation. And the intent on quantifying everything is when it comes to enforcement, we're not going to knock on the door and go, whose car's this, whose car's that? And it's easier to just be able to drive by a site and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, they're one over. They have too many vehicles there. Then that allows us to begin that conversation with the owner of the property and find a solution to bring the site into compliance. But there are certain sites where more vehicles could be appropriate on the site. So that was set as sites that are 1 acre in size or larger. They would have parking hours restricted to 6:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's matching our noise ordinance guidelines. They wouldn't be able to have the constant turnover of traffic. So this would be the type of use that a consultant perhaps that has customers come in and they're there for half a day or a full business day, not the I'm coming in for you're having cars turn over every half hour. And then to the extent practicable, we want them to screen from adjoining properties that additional parking to minimize that impact on those adjoining residences. Then, as with our current code, if a license is required from state, federal, local, any jurisdiction to operate their home occupation, they need to keep that in good compliance to operate their home occupation. That is a semi-brief run through of that home occupation section. As I said, this is a more time-sensitive item, so if there are items that there's desire to see changed, questions, now would be a great time to do that because we're going to be getting that public hearing set and getting the adoption process moving here. I can't recall if we're doing it at the next meeting or the first meeting in October for the public hearing, one or the other. So this will be quickly coming before you for action.
I have a quick question. Did we intend for items F2, 3, and 4 to also apply to the parking that is allowed for E?
No, we did not. And the reason there was, if I recall, was that if you're having more vehicles coming to a site, there's a higher chance for noise disturbance. So that's why we mimic the noise code hours. You got more engines running, more car doors opening and closing, people walking to and from the premises. And that's also in line with 3 there in 4.
But I would just point out, so for instance, the number 3, parking shall only be allowed for home occupation, which have a low volume of client turnover throughout the day. So the reason we wouldn't want that to apply under E, because you have E sort of covers the people who are doing swimming lessons or other types of piano lessons where there is going to be turnover.
Exactly.
So I think especially 3, the turnover, 3 and 4, I think shouldn't apply to E. I could see where maybe 2 might, between the hours of 6:30 and 9, it might make sense to have that requirement apply to E. But I think the rest, 1, 3, and 4 at a minimum should apply only to F.
And I would just comment that on the hours, the noise ordinance is still going to apply, but this goes above and beyond the noise ordinance. It's addressing both noise and being very explicit. No, you're not having operations outside these hours if you have more than 5 cars. But I certainly, I could see number 2 being in with E, but I don't know how necessary it is.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings about any of those. I guess my thought on the swimming lessons, that's still low volume of customer turnover. I don't see even 5 or 6 being that high a volume, but
but the idea being, the whole low volume concept is that the cars are coming at 9 in the morning and they're not so the volume is about the number of, trips being.
Cars in a day, right.
Yeah, so that, I think that's where we kind of visualized them as that's why we talked about, if you're gonna have 10 cars, we don't want it to be a lot of trip generation. So it's more cars, but it's really not that many trips because they kind of come in early in the morning and go out later in the day.
I'm
You don't
comfortable with the
want,
way.
yeah,
it's
you don't want
proposed.
10 cars turning over every single
Right.
hour on the hour.
I'm comfortable with the way it's proposed.
Yeah, probably a couple of reasons why we got into this situation. One, our current home occupation ordinance, I think, had some real issues with clarity and vagueness. I mean, it talks about that, we don't want a home occupation that impacts the residential character of the neighborhood. But we also had language later on that allowed for off-street parking, and all we required it to be was adequate to accommodate the demand generated by the home occupation. And so those two were really kind of in conflict. And so I think as we work to try to put this together, we tried to resolve those conflicts and try to create some standards that are pretty concrete and measurable. And I think we've done that, and I really appreciate the work that staff did. We had, I think, 3 meetings on this to try to hammer through these things, and so staff did a great job of trying to kind of fine tune and figure that all out. And so I think we're walking away with a home occupation ordinance that really tries to balance the whole idea that if property owner X is going to use this property, that use of the property should be allowed as long as it's not negatively impacting property owner Y, the neighboring property's use and enjoyment of their own property. Now, that's kind of a subjective standard. It's because it's, what I think that shouldn't bother me, but it might bother somebody else. So when you're trying to write ordinances that do that is hard. But I think we've tried to do a pretty good job of balancing and creating some objective standards that sort of say, if you do this, then that by a reasonable standard would be violating the other person's use and enjoyment of their property. So I think it's a significant improvement over our current home occupation ordinance, and I think also will be easier to enforce.
As drafted, this certainly does provide additional specificity that the current code lacks. So it provides better means for staff to enforce the ordinance as adopted.
Any other questions or comments for Clayton on this? So it goes back to the P&Z Commission for their consideration and recommendation.
Yep, we'll send that to them for their formal recommendation and then bring it back for public hearing and get the adoption process rolling. And like I said, I think we're going to probably have that at the first meeting in October for public hearing. Moving on then to the other section we have tonight is signage. Put up my items here. So we went into our entire zoning code update process knowing signage was a major item we needed to tackle. Several recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings relating to sign codes needing to be content neutral needed to be addressed. So what that in a nutshell says is you cannot categorize a sign based on its content and regulate it based on that content. So you can't have a separate category for a real estate sign and a separate category for project identification sign because it's based on the content that is being displayed on there. What we can do, however, is regulate things such as the location of a sign, the materials that's constructed of, the size, setbacks, things of that nature that are applicable to any sign of that category, regardless of the content being displayed. So a lot of the items in this section, they're similar to our existing code, but they're different in the sense of they're categorized differently. We currently do regulate signs different based on their category. We have project identification sign, we have real estate sign. We're going to have to group those together. And there will be some consequences here that you may not have had under the existing ordinance, but we have those limitations, and this is intended to reflect that we need to protect the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, freedom of speech. So kind of taking you through this, item 1 there is just around purpose, and that subpoint 3 even addresses we need to interpret this in a manner consistent with the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. Item 2, this is general requirements. This is going to apply to any sign, temporary sign or flag. Going to look through here and highlight the more important parts. The sign area formulas, those are identical to our current code, so no proposed changes there. We are proposing to add in some requirements about allowable sign materials and the support structure materials for ground-mounted signs. And that's kind of pulling items that we had established with our temporary sign code, which we adopted, I believe it was last year at this point. So pulling some of those items through there. All signs are going to have to be maintained and obsolete signs taken down. There are, moving further down to item subpoint 3 there are certain signs that are just going to be prohibited outright for a variety of reasons. Hazardous signs, for example, if they're structurally unsafe, constitute a hazard to pedestrians or vehicle traffic. I mean, those are things that we're just not going to allow anywhere. They're unsafe. And I know I did say you can't regulate signs based on their content. There are a very few exceptions. Obscene materials is an example of one of those exceptions. However, what I view as obscene and you view as obscene may not meet the criteria of a legal definition of obscene. So it's really getting to signs that are immoral and illustrate specified anatomical parts. So kind of gets very specific and obscene in some case law there, but there is some limited circumstances that content can still be regulated. I do want to highlight, because the question came up earlier, we still are prohibiting roof signs, except as otherwise approved. So the sign here in the town center on the trellis will still be permitted because the overlay will overrule this section of it. I do want to highlight that. There are several signs that we will propose to exempt from a site, and they're not going to be required to have permits. Some limited signage on all buildings based on, they could have 1 square foot signs, maximum of 3 on any building wall. Many of these are very similar to our current code. We did add in that temporary signs meeting the regulations in this chapter, and flags and flagpoles meeting the regulations, those will be exempt. And that's really keeping with current standard. Yes?
What's a vehicle sign?
That we did define because we caught that we didn't have a good definition of that. So as proposed, a vehicle sign is a message, inscription, or logo painted, attached, or incorporated on a motor vehicle parked on a property which is intended to draw attention to the use on the premises. So the intent here is not I wrap my vehicle with my corporate logo or something, and it's my corporate car that I'm coming and going day to day. It's I wrap a vehicle, park it on the site, and it never moves. It's an inoperable vehicle effectively. Or I'm putting a billboard on the back of a flatbed truck and parking it on a site. Those would be some examples of what we're intending by vehicle sign.
So Trostles, Ace Hardware.
Those would not be vehicle signs in the sense that they are intended to be operable vehicles coming and going, and they're just storing their vehicle, essentially, they do park their vehicles in a manner that does provide advertisement. And we did struggle with this definition a little bit of, we don't necessarily, I don't think those are the types of vehicles we're hoping to prohibit, and maybe they are, correct me if I'm wrong. But I think what we don't want to have is a flatbed truck with, I've seen them before where you have a flatbed truck and they've essentially have a billboard attached to it and it's double-sided, and sometimes they'll drive them through town. I think that's what we're getting at, or trying to.
But that's operable.
But
That's operable.
The
That's
vehicle is
operable.
operable. It's an operable
Yeah.
vehicle.
This is a sticky one.
we've struggled with this one a little
I would
bit.
hesitate to try to regulate if somebody is, because you do see those signs that are vehicles that are kind of being used. And I think, I'm not sure what the public purpose we're trying to accomplish by regulating them.
So is the desire then that we don't prohibit them and then we have some standards for them?
Might be the direction we want to go.
Yeah, we'll be here for years writing those standards.
But I think we can look to see what other cities are doing, because we see them.
Right, but do other cities regulate them?
I
I
don't
think
know.
that'd be, if they do, then we could look at them. But if they don't, then that may be the answer, that we don't touch it.
We can look at what other cities are doing. I have not looked into that, so I think that's a good first place to start, is look at what other cities are doing.
Sorry.
No, thank you. I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, one thing that I've seen is the flags too. And I'm not just talking about the United States of America flag. There are other flags. So that it becomes, like you said, it's sort of a sticky slope.
I just want to point out to Councilperson Martin that banning Hawkeye flags would be considered not content neutral.
What a great idea.
Actually, when you guys
Is that a friendly amendment?
were talking about the pickup with the sign in the back, I felt very targeted.
A fire Brian Ferentz sign is not a content restriction, however. I'll let you get away with that one.
I can't see our police chasing down a moving vehicle with a banner in the back. If it's in motion, I think it's allowed. That's my thing. So
We'll take a look at what other communities are doing in regards to vehicle signs and report back. Moving on to kind of our first category of permanent signs is permanent ground signs, which is the broad category. And then we have structured, and all the sections forthcoming are going to be structured very similar to this. First up is general regulations that are going to apply to all ground signs regardless of the subtype. One that I want to point out here is subpoint C. Currently, we have in our regulations an allowance for a project identification sign. This would be your sign at the entrance of a subdivision announcing that you're in that subdivision, Green Meadows West, whatever the subdivision may be, the enclave. But that is categorizing it based on the content, project identification. So our take on this was that you could have, where there's a commercial or residential subdivision with an owner's association providing for maintenance of that sign, they can have one ground sign at the entrance from any collector or arterial roadway, not exceeding 40 square feet, 10 feet in height, and certain setbacks, matching those same requirements for setbacks, size, as our current code. But it is opening it up a bit in the sense that it's any commercial or residential subdivision, but there will be instances also that a development may not be able to have a project identification sign if they don't have frontage on a collector or arterial roadway as defined by our comprehensive plan. So there is a little bit of give and take there, but in reviewing this, I believe this is what we arrived at as content neutral, but trying to get as close to that current ability to have a project identification sign. Then moving down, we have, we did split up signage based on residential zoning districts and non-residential, recognizing different needs and desires within those sub-zoning districts. Monument signs will only be permitted within the R3 and R4 zoning districts with a maximum area of 40 square feet, 10 feet in height. Manual, changeable copy, and electronic message centers would be prohibited. I would highlight that the Planning and Zoning Commission, when they reviewed this, questioned whether or not this would prohibit, say, a church or some type of commercial enterprise within an R3 or R4 district, or not an R3 or R4, an R1 or R2 or some other R district that's not R3 or R4. Would they be prohibited from having a sign? And as currently drafted, yes, they would be prohibited from having a sign. So it's on staff's radar that we're going to look at that a little bit more and see if there is a way we can allow for some non-commercial or some commercial signage in those residential districts. But it may be a case where no, unless we open it up, that everyone can have a 40 square foot monument sign in their front yard. So we're looking at that a little bit more, but I want to point that out. In non-residential districts, again, following our current code, maximum 80 square feet, 10 feet in height. There is some allowance for manual, changeable copy, and electronic message centers. I'll highlight on the electronic message centers that we are reducing the time that messages can be displayed. Currently, it cannot change more than once per 5-minute interval. What's being proposed is it cannot change once per 30-second interval. So they could have more messages displayed more rapidly. But again, trying to avoid the rapid succession that would maybe give the appearance of a moving image or a flashing sign. So allowing for some more display of message, but protecting motorists from distractions.
Clayton, I thought we had modified that so that they could do it more timely. Was that not the case?
I believe we initiated it, but we never finalized it.
Okay.
So that's my understanding.
All right.
We are still retaining the ability that you can forfeit monument signage in exchange for additional building signage. We call this our scooters provision because we adopted it in regards to a request from Scooters Coffee to have additional building signage on their site. So on that property, they forego one of their 2 allowed monument signs for an additional 80 square feet. That's still going to be applicable. Any property could do that. To date, Scooters is the only one that has utilized that. Interstate-oriented monument signs largely remaining the same as current standards, with the exception of increasing the maximum sign area from 100 square feet to 150 square feet. And the basis for that increase is I had done some research on legibility of signs at particular speeds of travel. Interstate 8035 is signed as a 65 mile per hour travel. Using that speed, really you should be at about 150 square feet to have legibility. And that also keeps us pretty in line with the other metro communities as I had reviewed. We had actually been on the low end of that. So this is bringing us a little more in line with other metro communities. Electronic message centers and manual changeable copy would be prohibited on interstate monument signs. Highway-oriented monument signs, very similar to interstate, but this one's designated in recognition of Highway 141 corridor. And a lot of the same criteria. We have set this one at 100 square foot maximum sign area. Currently, Highway 141 is signed as a 65-mile-an-hour travel. However, the anticipation with discussions with DOT is as development occurs in that area, that would be a reduced speed down to 55 miles an hour, similar to what's happening in Grimes as well as areas in Granger. So that sign area would be based off of 55-mile-an-hour speed travel. Any questions on ground signs before I move on to building signs?
There's more.
There's more. All right, building signs. Again, starting with general requirements and splitting them up residential, non-residential. Building signs would only be permitted in R3 and R4 zoning districts. 5% of the wall area or 30 square feet, whichever is less. And that's keeping in line with current code as well. Similar comment from Planning and Zoning Commission about what about churches or commercial enterprises that may be operating in an R1 or R2 district. We're looking into that a little bit further and we'll report back. Non-residential districts, 5% of the wall area can be building signage, no maximum square footage there. That's keeping in line with current code. One thing we are clarifying is how we calculate that percentage on multi-tenant buildings, and that you get 5% of the area owned or leased in that space, so that you're not taking away the ability for other suites to have their own signage as well. So that's more or less just a clarification of current practice. We would still be requiring the individual solid letters on properties, except the M1 and M2, which you would be allowed to have a panel sign, either painted or affixed to a wall. There was some question at Planning and Zoning Commission about whether or not we need to open up or relax the solid letters in some of those other districts as well. There wasn't clear direction out of there, so if there's a desire to discuss that, we certainly could do that. Some of these other categories we're going to go, the next three are just really providing some criteria that we're currently lacking. Marquee, awning, canopy signs, and projecting signs, making sure that there's proper clearance for pedestrians and or vehicles that may be traveling under or near the sign. Window signs is one that is a little different than current, where that you would be allowed to have no more than 20% of the surface on the ground floor as window signage. If you're on the second floor or greater, you can have up to 100% of your window covered. You're still capped on your total building sign area, so you might not be able to cover 100% of your windows, but you certainly can cover portions thereof. The intent there being on that ground level, we want to promote an active streetscape. People can see into a business and feel like they're in a lively place if they're walking down a sidewalk or here in the town center, for example. You know, we want to make sure people feel that they can see in, and it helps promote a sense of security of, you know, what's kind of on the other side of the wall there. If you cover any portion of your window with window signage, it no longer would classify as a Class A material in architecture, and it would drop it down to a Class B. So sign owners will have to take into consideration the architecture of their building to make sure that they remain in compliance with architectural standards. We wanted to make sure we had that protection as well. Any questions on building signage? Hearing none. I'm not going to go through temporary signs since that's a recent update we did.
Unless Tom wants us to.
Actually, Mayor, I do have a question on that. I'm sorry to be the fun hater here. There was, I thought, a provision in our discussed or adopted version that talked about temporary signs not hanging over an entrance or exit to a building, some sort of doorway or even passageway. I didn't see that in there. Is that still in there?
think we may have moved that up to just general, that we didn't want any sign potentially posing that hazard,
Temporary or permanent.
temporary or permanent.
All right, in a follow-up email, can you point to me where exactly that's stated or how that's stated?
Y'all have to look at it. If it's not there, it sounds like maybe there's a desire to make sure that's explicitly listed.
Yes.
Okay, we'll verify that and follow up.
Okay. My concern is if it happens on a permanent sign, we'll have probably some compliance issues.
So is there a desire to apply it to both permanent and temporary, or just temporary?
Well, temporary to me is of a greater concern because of the perhaps lack of substantial fixture that it would be attached to, that it could fall or hurt someone, versus I hope that it would comply in a permanent standard, that it wouldn't have that same potential for accident or mishap.
And I guess as I further think about this on my feet here, we require a permit for a permanent sign. We do not require a permit for a temporary. So I certainly see the need, especially in the temporary basis, where we have that staff review and protection under the permanent basis that you may not otherwise have under the temporary, because we're not reviewing temporary signs.
Would
So-
it fall under the definition of hazardous sign, though? Is structurally unsafe? Just,
Maybe we'll look into it and make sure it's properly.
Yeah, if it may be there and I just missed it, but if it is over the general sign, my concern is now that we're going to have a perhaps roof sign on top of the trestle out here, that is a walkway, depending on how it's worded, that wouldn't necessarily be accepted, and yet that's a permanent structure that I hope would be able to withstand the wind loads and be affixed accordingly. So
I'll double check on that.
Thank you.
You did mention wind loads. We do have a general
I did see
requirement
that in there,
about,
yes.
protecting against wind loads.
Yep.
We'll make note of that and follow up on that.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Sorry.
Anything else on temporary signs? All right, moving on to flags and flagpoles. This is one we struggled with numerous times. I think what you're seeing here may be draft 7 or 8 that we've worked through. How do we properly address this in a way? Because we cannot just say the flag of the United States of America, the flag of state of Iowa is exempt, because that's content. It's the content of the flag. So we have to treat, those state sanctioned flags no different than the University of Iowa flag, Nebraska Cornhuskers, political candidate A, political candidate B, whatever the flag content may be, we have to treat them all identical. So we did have to expand upon our current regulations to provide a draft for you to review. And this is what we arrived at. And really what you got here is that flags, when they're at maximum unfurl, that they cannot extend beyond the property boundary as extended vertically. The intent there is you're not putting your flag right up on the property and it flapping over your neighbor's house, for example, because I have a big flag. So respecting that property boundary. Flagpoles would only be allowed to be ground mounted or affixed to the wall of a principal structure. They could not be affixed to a fence, retaining or landscape wall, accessory structure, or other similar structure. We have broken this out on regulations within our residential districts and then our non-residential. In residential, you'd be capped at a maximum of 3 flags per property, a maximum of 30 square feet of flag area per property. Planning and Zoning Commission did comment on this, that they think that should be up to 80 square feet. We did not make that change yet because we wanted to have this discussion with you first, but they would like to see that go up to 80 square feet in residential. Maximum ground-mounted flagpole height, 25 feet, setback of 10 feet from all property lines. But if your flagpole is greater than 10 feet, you'd have to add 1 foot for each additional foot of height there. The thought process there being your flagpole falls over, it should fall on your property. In the non-residential section, we were taking into consideration, we have several properties in town already that have more than 3 flags, John Deere Financial, Corteva. There's also businesses that have a desire to display flags of a larger square footage. I think of Perkins as a prime example of their big flags that they have at every restaurant. So what we have proposed here is 3 flags per property or 1 flag per property for each 1.5 acres of lot area, whichever is greater. That would allow for John Deere Financial, for Corteva to continue to have the quantity of flags they have, while still providing some protections that we're not getting 1 million flags on a site. Flag area would also have the ability to be graduated, 600 square feet per property or 150 square feet for each 1.5 acres, whichever is greater. Thought process there is the developer that's looking to do the business park on Highway 141 south of the Highway 415 Saylorville Drive that you recently saw the rezoning for. He does have a desire to install a rather large flag. You might be familiar with the large flag on 2nd Avenue over by Smokey D's off of Interstate 8035. He developed that property as well. That's an example of a large flag he has. He'd like to do 5,000 square foot, 185 foot tall flag there. This would give him the means to have the flag area, but moving down to flagpole height, we would cap it at 150. So he wouldn't be able to have the height he wants, but he could potentially have the area, depending on how he plats the property, for example. But that's an extreme example there. Again, same setback standards as residential. Any questions on flags, flagpoles, comments?
Clayton, not to belabor this, but how does this flag policy work during holidays? For instance, someone wants to decorate their house with American flags throughout their yard or something along those lines. Was there a provision that talked about that only flags over a certain square footage actually even apply to this? And then also, I don't know, I must admit, what the zoning is of cemeteries in Johnston.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. That was a comment Planning and Zoning Commission made as well, specifically regarding cemeteries. Most of those are in our R districts, a residential district. Right now, they'd be capped at, under this draft, 3 flags within the cemetery, 30 square feet total. I don't think our intent was to say on Memorial Day, the veterans couldn't have flags at their gravestone. So we do need to look at that and find a solution for that. But if I just have my house on 4th of July, you'd be capped at 3 flags still. So you would not be able to have many, many flags beyond the 3. So I guess it does raise the question, are we comfortable with the number of flags, the square footage? Now, those are all items that could be adjusted if desired.
I think to Councilman Burkhart's point, I mean, on holidays, we often see people take 10 little flags and they stick them down the sidewalk that runs up to their house. Under this ordinance, they wouldn't be allowed to do that?
As drafted, no.
It'll be fun to enforce. Maybe the police department can get the building staff to enforce that one.
I think we somehow need to
Give some
continue
thought to that.
I know you're on draft 7, but
We've struggled with this one because it would be so easy if we could say the United States of America flag is exempt.
Well, let me ask a question. Can we distinguish between flags that are American and state flags versus banners, which are everything else, and create definitions that do that? You describe, you define flag as the American, the Iowa flag, and then banners, which is everything else, and then regulate them differently that way.
I would say you could regulate flags based on commercial versus non-commercial speech. That would be permissible. So if it was a flag advertising, you know, if it was like those temporary sort of banner flags that businesses put up to advertise their business, we could regulate those differently than non-commercial speech flags. But we can't say a non-commercial speech flag is only a flag for the state of Iowa, the United States of America, and other recognized countries.
So we can't give different definitions for flag and banner and regulate them differently.
We could if we talked about, but I would say we couldn't just limit flags to our only these things based on the content of the flag. It would have to say, I don't know, I'd have to look at that. to
Yeah,
try to-
take a look at that, because I think it seems to me back in my far past, when I was working in state government, there was a distinction between flags and banners, and they were regulated differently. But just consider that.
Sure.
So currently, as drafted, the definition of flag is any fabric or other flexible material, typically oblong or square in shape, which is designed to be attached to a flagpole on one edge of the flag only. Anything else is a banner and would fall under temporary sign regulations. So we can certainly work with Christine
Just
and
take a look at that and
see
see
if
if
that
there's
can
a way
be,
to make the distinction that way.
and perhaps that's a potential solution to the dilemma we face.
Back to your question about 30 square feet versus 80 square feet. Why were they thinking 80 square feet? If they had three
There was a
flags?
specific military flag that they were referencing. I can't recall which one it was. Maybe it was a POW flag.
You can only get it in a certain size?
I don't know if I was completely following the reasoning, other than it was something to do with a military flag. And they wanted to make sure that we weren't limiting the ability to fly
You
it.
could get some more information for it on that. That would be helpful.
Sorry, I just don't recall that
Yeah.
specific element. Any other comments or questions on flags, flagpoles? None. Procedural requirements largely remaining identical to current standards, and the same with non-conforming signs. So I'm not going to fall into those or go into detail on those two sections unless needed. Any further items you want to discuss regarding either home occupations or signage? Otherwise, we can wrap it up.
Any further questions or comments, council? Well, Clayton, you've done a heck of a job with this. This has not been an easy task, so thank you for your patience
Very welcome.
as we work through it with you, so.
We'll work on those items and report back.
Okay,
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Which takes us back to the agenda. And I think all that we have remaining are the city administrator comments and the city council comments. So Jim?
Just have two quick comments this evening. First of all, earlier tonight, the Des Moines Airport had a meeting with representatives from the communities that have signed on to participate in the funding of the airport, as well as the design, and most of the communities wanted to participate in some of the design area. And so the mayor represented us at the meeting. I listened in virtually. But so they were talking about, what impressions we want the airport to have for visitors to our community, both to the central Iowa area and the state of Iowa, and talking about how some of those design issues related to that, and talk a little bit about the phasing of it. I just mentioned this evening just to let you know that they are now starting to really talk about the design of the airport involving the communities that have agreed to participate in that. So certainly more to come. Tonight's meeting was really just sort of getting overall impressions from, what we want the airport to say about our community. And But they'll get into more details as we go down that path. So just wanted to mention that because I know we haven't talked about it for a very long time. The other thing I just want to mention real quickly, we had a few of our staff participate in an MPO program, Metropolitan Planning Organization program, related to getting data on our bike trails. And they have a bike that they call the data bike that drives around on the trail. Well, it doesn't drive by itself, but people help it go. But it gets the condition of the trails, and both from a visual standpoint, plus that it measures, how smooth the trails are. And we had an opportunity a couple weeks ago to have the bike for a little bit over a week. All of our trails are ridden. Dave Kroll sort of coordinated it for us, and then Aaron Wolf participated. I had an opportunity to ride it one afternoon as well. But the good news part of it is that we will have some good data on our trails, both the current condition, but it can also help us look at, how it may deteriorate, or certain parts of our trail may deteriorate over time. The goal is, last year, I think they did most of the regional trails, and this year they're focusing on the local trails within the community. So we do have data now on our trails, and we'll be able to monitor that.
When do you
going
expect to
forward.
get the data back from them on that?
I don't know how quickly that would be. If Dave were still here, he could probably answer that question, but.
So we're still waiting. We don't have the
I
data
don't
yet,
think
but we
we
should
do.
have it at some
Yeah.
point.
So when we get information, we'll be sure to share that.
I've not heard that we've got the data back yet.
And that's all I had for this evening. Does anybody else have anything tonight? Matt?
Yeah, I have one item. We're nearing the end of our sanitary sewer cleaning in the first of the 4 years. The contractor had indicated that as he's nearing that, he is willing to hold his prices so that he could roll into phase 2. And I just wanted to get some feedback from the council if they think that if that would work. We did just get bids earlier this year in April. So those bids would still be current prices. If we go back out for more quotes, I think we'll probably get higher pricing this time of the year. So I just wanted to see if we can determine that based on those bids, that this next section would be cheaper than the additional quotes that we received. We had 4 companies that quoted this. The first 2, one was like at 86,000, and the second closest one was 10,000 above that. So I think it would be good for us to try and just keep the momentum and roll into that next phase. I can report back to council if it would be cheaper to do that, if council would be okay with that.
What phase is that again?
So it's our sanitary sewer cleaning.
Oh, the cleaning.
The
Okay.
cleaning of our sanitary sewers, the existing sanitary sewers within the community. So we've got a 4-phase process. This was year 1. We're now in the fiscal year so that we could go into phase 2 of that. The contractor is willing to hold his prices, which he's about 19 cents a lineal foot cheaper than the second quote that we received. So it would probably be beneficial if we just continued with that contractor. We've had great success and good luck with him so far.
Work we would otherwise be doing anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, and what you're saying is the current provider is going to do it cheaper. So, I mean, seems like the right thing to do.
Yeah, I just wanted to get feedback before
Sure.
we would enter that next
Because,
phase.
right, I mean, the length of the term of the contract was a certain term.
It's a footage. Yeah, it's a certain footage of sanitary sewer that he cleans.
But I mean, how long when we signed the contract with him, was there a length of term to the contract?
No, it's to be completed within the year. So it's based on footage of sanitary sewer that he would clean. We've got a budget of right between $90,000 to $100,000 per fiscal year. So we would stay within that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. Nothing with that.
It's not a multi-year contract. It would just, once he's done cleaning that within the 6 to 9 months, we could then go back out and get it quoted next spring for additional quotes for future phases.
Any other staff comments? Thank you, Matt. None? Councilman Evans? You're good? Councilman Coe?
So I think a lot of us were at the LifeServe groundbreaking I don't know when that was, 10 days or so ago, maybe further. But one of the things that I thought was really cool about it was how many comments that I know I heard about how great the city was to work with. Part of the comments were related to they wanted to be able to park that day on site. And so they came to the city and said, hey, can we do this? And they really appreciated that city's willingness to work with them on it. The architect talked about how great the city was to work with as part of the whole project. And I think that's just really reflective of a culture that has been established that sort of says, hey, look, we're gonna try to get to yes on if you need something. Obviously, we're not gonna violate our standards or our principles, but if we can find a way to get to yes, we're gonna try to do it. And I think that's just a great culture. I think it's a compliment to Jim and the whole team. As we start thinking about all the great things that Jim has helped create in our community, I think that culture is something. And it's a reflection of, I think, even the folks here at the dais do. But to me, I was just struck that day by how many people said, boy, the city was great to work with on this. And I just think it's a compliment to all of you as department heads. It's a compliment to Jim as city administrator for the culture that he's really helped create. And so I just kind of wanted to pass that along. So.
Councilman Burkhart.
Just very briefly, I know that many of us have received some communications as of late regarding some stormwater improvement projects that haven't met necessarily with the favor of everyone in the neighborhood. I'm talking about in that Longboat area. I know we consolidated with another one. I first want to start with my absolute and sincerest thanks to the city staff that have been diligently out there visiting with those neighbors, assessing the status of those projects, but then also doing kind of the behind the scenes, writing the responses that are necessary to make sure that true and accurate information is being provided to these neighbors, those impacted by these easements. But also even researching kind of the legal recourse that these neighbors have if something should potentially go wrong in the future. In other words, after we try to button up these projects. As one resident who was concerned sent me a message, and I was able to pass that along to Matt to be able to do some follow-up. So my thanks in that regard. In that same breath, however, I think we need to always continue to strive to make sure we're painting the most realistic picture of what this is going to do and the impacts it's going to have to residents' property. I know to some extent we work very diligently to secure those easements, and I don't want to do things that potentially cause us to dissuade them from participating voluntarily in these types of projects, because they are very much needed, not only within their neighborhoods and for their own properties, but also for the properties upstream and down. But at the same point, it feels like more and more some of these folks, once we get into this project, are claiming some concern that has me concerned. In other words, that I want to make sure that while this is a temporary road to greater improvement, that we at least have kind of informed them or tried to educate them on what the impact is going to even be temporarily in that. I feel like city staff is doing a great job of trying to be responsive. In retrospect, I don't know, and I wonder though, was there more we could have done up front to cause some of this irritation to not actually have transpired? Only time will tell, but thanks for all you do.
Councilwoman Martin.
I have nothing, thank you.
Councilman Reddy.
I'll pass, thank you.
The only thing that I would add this evening, I did go to a DART meeting today as well, and they did approve a route extension through Johnston on weekends, on Saturdays, recognizing that with the development of the town center, there will be more interest in coming to Johnston, and travel through Johnston on the weekends and on Saturdays. So that was a positive movement. I intend to work with Janet to get that information out to our residents, make them aware of it. So Jim?
Just one other thing I wanted to add this evening. Just a reminder to council, Friday is our staff appreciation event that we're going to have, something we hadn't really done to this extent before, but we're going to take some time off Friday afternoon and thank our staff for the great work that they do. Appreciate the comments this evening, and you know, a lot of it goes back to the information we received in our community survey and all the good work that our employees do. So it's from noon to 4. If you have time to stop out and say hey and get to meet some of our staff, feel free to do that. I'm sure they'd appreciate anybody that could stop by and join us for a little while that afternoon. But it'll be out here in the yard, and we've got a picnic lunch and some games and things planned. So feel free to stop by if you have a chance.
It'll be 70 degrees and the sun shining.
I think
87.
90.
Oh.
Last I saw, but.
Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we are adjourned.
I see what's